Hello there, welcome to the PlugBox Podcast, where we discuss all things EV and renewables and generally have a damn good chinwag. Anyway, on with the show.
Good evening.
Hello there.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, good, it's fine. We'll edit all the rustling out in post, don't worry.
Was there some rustling, was there?
A little bit, was it?
I'm faffing around with the buttons, Pete, you know me.
How we doing?
Yeah, all right. All ready for another episode 3, difficult third album, right?
Ooh, maybe. We'll see how it goes. It's going well so far, I think.
Yeah, we've had a few people listen in. Of course, the previous episodes are up on YouTube, so do catch up if you haven't done so already. But episode 3 today, what's on the menu?
I was hoping you're going to tell me, if I'm honest with you.
Well, I can do, because as you well know, I know. First and foremost, I think what we need to cover is Volkswagen.
Is this German humour?
Well, is it or isn't it real? First of all, does anybody actually know? Does Volkswagen know?
I have honestly no idea at this point. I mean, if it would have come out tomorrow, right? Tomorrow being the 1st of April for listeners, then maybe it would have been funny, or at least you might have got a raised smile about it. But it seems that it got, quote unquote, leaked 2 days ago, and then we've had some back and forth on: is it real? Isn't it real? Are Volkswagen rebranding to Volkswagen? Is it a subsidiary of Volkswagen of America? It all seems badly managed, and there's
a lot of Twitter traffic speculating as to whether it is or it isn't. It seems to flip-flop every day. One day you'll see, they're absolutely serious. They're going to rename the whole of the company in the US as Volkswagen to promote electric vehicle adoption. And then the next day it's, no, it's all just a ruse. It's just a joke. They're being funny. But right now, I don't know.
Yeah, as I said, maybe it's German funny. But as you say, I've read a few things that say, no, they have registered it in some manner and that it is a subdivision or organisation that's linked or part of VW of America. And maybe they'll use some different badge or wording or something like this for EV products in America. But as you say, it seems to be flip-flopping and going back and forth. And are they now just doubling down because actually they've created some media storm about it?
It's had quite a good effect. Let's not beat around the bush. It's had a lot of traffic, as I said, on Twitter, so people are talking about it. And VW have in the past had quite good marketing campaigns. It's a good play on words. So if nothing else, it has sparked a bit of imagination.
I mean, it's got to be better than clean diesel, right?
Ironic, I think.
Too soon?
That is fair, I would say. Fair. So let's see how that one plays out. Next on the menu.
Is that topic one already? Whistle stop talk.
It's hard hitting, isn't it? It's punchy. Let's keep it fresh. Let's keep it interesting.
Okay, moving on.
Item 2. I'm going to go through the list I've written on my notepad, and that is the few images floating around of a Tesla hatchback, which not sure if they're real, not sure if they're genuine, but it's got to be a model that's coming fairly soon. Penciled in at starting at 18,000 of your British pounds. Cheap.
Yeah, so I think anything with Tesla and Elon spreads like wildfire around the internet, right? The render, if we can call it that, as you say, is a bit of a hodgepodge of a Y and something else. But of course,
Someone's found the resize function in Photoshop on a Model Y and squashed it a bit.
Yeah, maybe so. But we know from Battery Day, whenever that was, way back in the summer last year, that they announced some additional car or small car, or at least a car with a cover thrown over it in the deck that they shared. So we know it's coming. And in terms of, as you say, the price that's been floated about, maybe that's congruent with what we've been seeing about a factory in India. So their industry minister's been very vocal publicly about beating China on cost. And maybe if they're going for this low entry point or low price point car, then maybe that makes sense to manufacture in India. Who knows? But certainly I would imagine there'll be a smaller car for China coming soon, and maybe that makes its way to the US and Europe as well.
Of course, that would be shipped through the Suez Canal, wouldn't it? From India. Let's hope they can. All the boats can sail in a straight line.
Well, the internet was awash with memes, wasn't
it? It was lit, I think is the phrase.
So I think the Austin Powers one was the best.
Yeah, I've seen a few of them. So it's going to be a few years off, I think, the Tesla hatch, isn't it? I mean, they tend to unveil their concept cars plenty of time in advance before you can actually get your hands on one. Let's look at Cybertruck. I think that's just past its 2-year anniversary since it was unveiled, and we're still waiting to see that on the road officially. We haven't seen the launch official version yet.
Well, it's funny you should say about anniversaries, because it's 5 years since the Model 3 was launched. Half a decade.
Is it really?
Yeah.
It's done pretty well, hasn't it?
There you go. Yeah, I think it was third best-selling car in China last month. About 14,000 units, something like this. So, yeah, it's going great guns. And the only thing I think about the hatch that's maybe questionable for me is, of course, Tesla's tagline or mission is to accelerate the advent of sustainable energy, right? So it makes sense to sell a more cost competitive product, let's not say cheaper. But at the same time, Tesla have been trying to sell premium products, like a Model 3, for instance, right, is a 3 Series, right, or a C-Class or an A4. And maybe it's not got the nicey nice, touchy and feely, and we can have an argument about build quality either way, but it's pitched as a premium product. Is a car that's, we know probably, less than the Model 3. Can you still call that premium at that point, or are they going into a completely different market segment?
It's a good question. You'd buy one, though. I know you would.
Well, we've all got to have a little run around, haven't we?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Moving swiftly on. Item 3. What's item 3 on the list?
Well, something we touched upon last week, the Jeep concept, the Magneto. Yes, it's very real. People have been driving around in it in desert in the US, and Pete, you'll be pleased to know it doesn't have doors, or at least you can remove them. It's everything you want it to be. It's a Jeep with a battery underneath. It looks great, I have to say.
Yeah, as you say, last week's episode, of course, is up on the YouTubes, but we said at the time, right, is, they've seen the success or perceived success of the Ford Mach-E, and also, kind of the Bronco as well from Ford. And I think kind of FCA, who are definitely one of the manufacturers that are behind the curve on EVs, have kind of put, 2 and 2 together and gone, actually, we can do something with a brand like what Ford have done with Mustang. Let's make an electric Jeep. And I think
I have to say there's some interesting stuff about this car, though. So it's an EV, that's clear, but they've left in it a 6-speed manual with a low range mode that's impossible to stall even if you take your foot off the clutch.
Interesting.
So this is something we haven't seen before, but yeah, we'll see how that pans out. I'm sure there'll be some videos on the YouTubes, as you put it, to see what the journalists make of it. But interesting one, that one. Plus, it looks great.
It does look great. Got a Jurassic Park vibe, right?
Oh yeah, you know where I stand on Jurassic Park.
How long until someone wraps it?
I'd do it on day one. Yeah. No information though on battery size that I can see. So we'll have to talk about range on another day. But its powertrain is good for 270 horsepower. That's a lot of torques, but it's heavy, as you'd expect. Okay, what's next on the list then?
So we're going to talk about charging a little bit.
Well, yeah, we said this last week when we were talking about home charging versus no need to home charge, and I think you want to talk about charging away from home a little bit more, don't you? Networks more specifically.
Yeah, so we can cover networks and we can kind of cover how to use them. So I think the key thing really is, we hear this thing all the time. In the UK, we have a great app called ZapMap, who don't sponsor us yet, but we're always open to it. But yeah, as you say, it's a go-to, and it's amazing actually when you look at it, how many charge stations there is.
You can almost guarantee there'll be one within 2 miles of wherever you are in the UK.
Yep, very true.
Much.
Now, whether it works or not,
different question.
Is another question, yeah. But as you say, I think one of the things is until you spend some time in an EV, it's very easy to say, "Oh, there's nowhere to plug in my car," or "I can't get to where I want to go," or if I go to visit Aunt Annie in the north of Scotland, I can't get there. But if you're currently driving around in a fossil car, then you're not seeing or you're not looking for charge stations. And as soon as you get in them, as soon as you get the app, or most cars obviously tell you where stations are, you quickly realise there's a vast array of them.
Yeah, I think that's true. And like we've talked about ZapMap being the go-to application, I think when you have adopted an EV, you soon start to bias towards a chosen network that you know and feel comfortable with.
Yeah,
I certainly do. I almost plot my routes based upon the networks that litter that route.
Yeah, so I think it's not unreasonable to say we're both fans of InstaVolt. The big pro being, I've been driving an EV now for the best part of 2 years, and I can hand on heart say I've never got to an InstaVolt and one not worked.
Mm-hmm.
The downside is you pay for that, right? It's 35 pence a kilowatt hour.
Yep.
Which
now,
is...
to put that into context, because there may be listeners elsewhere, for a kilowatt at home during the day, I pay 14 pence, and at night it's 5 pence. So to pay upwards of 30p a kilowatt is quite costly.
Yep. But it's like anything, right? It's the fossil analogy would be you pay more for petrol at a motorway services than maybe you do at the petrol station at the end of your road. You're paying for the location, the convenience at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. But as you say, 35p is quite expensive. Now, there's brands or networks that are more, and there's some that are less, right? So obviously BP Pulse is the biggest one in the UK, or ChargeMaster, or whatever it's called, Polar, whatever it's called this week. I think it's Pulse. And I think theirs is 15 pence per kilowatt hour for rapids.
Even if it was over 40p, it's still a lot cheaper than petrol.
Yeah. If you work it out right and think about maybe a 50 kilowatt hour battery, you can say, okay, that doesn't do the silly 600-700 miles that people apparently want to do in the diesel cars. But, if you work out a couple of batteries worth, which will do the same amount of range, you can't get a tank of diesel, I think, these days for less than 60, 70 quid. You're certainly not paying that for 2 batteries worth of electric, even if you are using public charge stations. But it's interesting. But yeah, the thing with BP, of course, is you need a subscription. And to me, it just seems silly, and it's kind of infuriating. I mean, there's been one big change this week or this past week. There's a network called Genie Point, which is done by kind of an energy supplier or utility called Engie, I think. And before they had a connection fee, which is just silly. You don't pay to use a petrol pump. You pay for the fuel that you use. And now they've moved
subscribe to a petrol supplier either.
Very true. I guess that's another point. But now they've moved to just paying for what you use. The problem is, however, it's one of these networks where you have to have an app and you have to top the app up, which in my mind, again, seems silly, right? Because if I put £10 in and I use £7.58 of electricity, then I'm in this constant loop of giving my money away for it eventually to be used, and you're never going to use it exactly. And again, the great thing about Instavolt, as with a petrol pump, is, if you use 50 kilowatt hours, you get charged for 50. You use, there's no connection fee. You just build for what you use, and of course that is with a credit card. Yeah. Now there's others, right? One of my big bugbears, because there's one on a route I frequently travel, is Shell. So I'm not going to say it's bad that Shell are putting chargers at the petrol stations. It's good, and they're generally reliable and quite high powered. Most of them are 150 kilowatts. But I think it's gone up in the last week or so. They used to be 39 pence per kilowatt hour, and it's now
which is
43.
Expensive, which is even worse.
Super expensive. And it's like, Shell, come on, the V-Power thing, you might hoodwink someone for premium fuel, but there's no such thing as premium electric.
Are you sure about that?
Well, maybe there's some additive in that makes it go quicker or cleans my electric motor, who knows?
Power.
But, well, let's see if that's trademark. People might get sued.
Yeah, okay, in which case I apologise and retract any comments.
But yeah, 43 pence is getting silly. And I think obviously the worst one is Ionity, right? Is it about 70 pence or something like this if you don't have a subscription? And at that point, you don't want to say it is, but it's almost cheaper to drive a diesel car, I'm sure.
Which is wrong.
Yeah.
Defeats the object.
Yeah, definitely.
But all these networks are slowly spreading, so you have the feasibility to pick and choose your preferences, and as we've said, you can plot your route accordingly. Of course, if you can make the journey in one go, then great. But if not, then divert a little bit.
Yeah, and I think we touched on it last week, or whenever we touched about home charging, right, is on those select times of year where you do drive long journeys and you're emptying your battery, easily within 30, 40 minutes, you're back up to 80%. And it's, even an average EV can generally do about 200 miles these days. And that's, roughly 3 hours driving at 70 miles an hour, which you can't do in England anyway. Like, the island's not really big enough, for the roads are too slow, or etc. But even in the US or on continental Europe, after 3 hours, you don't want to stop for 30, 40 minutes. You want a coffee, you want a leg stretch, you want a bathroom break.
Need a bathroom break, not necessarily want.
I think how we measure range is fundamentally wrong, right? Is range should be determined on how long your bladder can last, or how long the bladder of your children can last. It's and most of that's generally less than what you can drive in an EV these days. So stopping for 30, 40 minutes when you've been driving for 2-3 hours shouldn't be a big deal, and you should be doing it anyway, really, from a safety point of view.
You do not need a car with 500 miles range. Nobody can hold that long.
But interesting.
I'll be interested to hear from anybody listening to this whether they've got any preferred charging networks that they like to use, whether they actively avoid some or choose to use others. Be interesting to hear. Let us know.
Yeah. And there's little walled gardens popping up, right? Like if you subscribe to Pulse, BP Pulse, then you're going to go out your way to use those because you're effectively paying for a cheaper rate. And equally, a number of manufacturers now are coming out with their own little schemes or little offerings where they work with different networks. So again, you're going to steer towards those networks. If you get some preferential rate or a discount or you get some free credit or whatnot. And it's kind of building up the loyalty card thing, right? Where people used to go to Shell so they could get the points, or they'd go to Tesco after they'd done the shopping because they want to get club card points. And it's kind of the same sort of thing. You kind of want to keep people within your own network. But one of the things that's been, one of the things I think that's been slowed down by COVID is there was a bit of a directive, at least in the UK, that I think by the end of 2020, charge points should have contactless card payments. They can still have RFID, you can still have an app, but they should really have contactless credit card availability. But yeah, it's one of the things I think that's been put on the back burner because of the old, the big COVID thing. So
I used a contactless payments charging network, or when was it? A few months back now. Plugged in, tapped contactless, the car charged, and if you're familiar with using them, usually you tap your card again to end the charge, and it didn't. It just carried on charging. Of course, I had to call the number. I was put on hold. Meanwhile, more and more electricity is flowing into the car, being charged. I just didn't need that much, and there's a little bit of a way to go, I think, before the reliability of them improves, but it shouldn't put anybody off adopting. I think there are leaps in improvements being made currently, and certainly the network just is ever increasing.
Yep, definitely. Okay, what's next?
Lucid.
Aha, more cars we can't afford.
Well, you say that, but I read an article this week that they have aspirations to go mass market as well. And their strategy is not too dissimilar to that of Tesla, I would say, in that they are pitching at a high value product to start with, earn some pennies, and then try and adopt something that is more affordable for the masses. So I think we've yet to see a Lucid on the road officially. They've certainly been very visible with their testing and their production environment. There's a lot of videos online. So it's not a long way off, but I think a small, affordable car is some time yet before it arrives. But I'm interested in seeing where that company goes. You were saying to me earlier how there's oil money potentially behind this.
Yeah, I think, there's some... I don't want to guess, but I think some Saudi sovereign wealth fund or something like this, which are big investors in those guys. So, I'm not saying they don't need to start with premium or luxury, expensive, high margin products so that they can then use that money to reinvest. But they're very well funded, right? Like they've just gone public through a SPAC, which seems to be all the rage these days with tech companies and EV companies and renewables companies, where they kind of get onto the stock market through the back door. And of course, that gives them access to capital from selling those shares. So not only have they got some big backers before the company went public, they've now just got a big injection of cash. So I don't know. It seems a strange strategy for me. I touched on earlier about the Tesla hatch. Lucid are pitching a luxury EV. They've already talked about the Air and then the SUV. I think the name escapes me. Is it the Ocean? Maybe I could be wrong. But they certainly announced a big 3-row SUV as well. And they're all sort of, $70,000-$80,000 in the US plus tax. So they're not cheap cars. Porsche taking money, right? So to say, we're going to go mass market, I don't know. It's premature, if anything.
Now, to be mass market, they need cars around 20 to 30,000 pounds here in Europe. No, we're not Europe anymore, are we? On our small damp island off the coast
That's
of
the
Europe.
One.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see. And again, it's not that we're knocking it. It just seems odd.
On the contrary, actually, I think it's the company has a strong brand already. The products look nice, but as you say, perhaps not so affordable. It's certainly not initially.
I mean, Peter Rawlinson knows what he's doing, right? He's come from this damp little island, which is quite good from an auto point of view in terms of the industry. He was at Tesla for a long while, did some work on the Model S. I think it's debated how much Tesla like to admit he did or didn't do. And of course now, he's the CEO of Lucid. So there's a guy at the very top that knows what he's doing. And that shows in the product, right? Like, you wouldn't say no if someone was to give you one. And equally, I think if you had the cash, you'd certainly look to buy one at that price point.
Looks good in California.
Yes. How good it would look in, I don't know, downtown Pennsylvania or, Birmingham in the UK. I'm not sure.
It's big, isn't it? It's a big car. So I don't know how well it would suit the UK roads, but certainly be willing to try.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's another new concept out.
Another one?
Changing brands again. Yeah. I tell you what, the EV concepts are coming thick and fast at the moment. It's very easy to keep this podcast fed with news stories, because this week Lexus have released a concept called the LFZ. Now, last week we were talking about offerings from Korea, and I have to say the styling is rather similar in terms of the way it looks. So it's not an ugly car, but I am getting the impression that once again we're in an era where all the automotive companies seem to be following a fairly similar styling direction. So they're all going to look the same, or I fear they're all going to look the same.
Yeah,
but it's nice to see Lexus offering something, albeit just a concept at this stage.
I mean, I want to do a rant in a future episode about Toyota. I've got
we need
no
a full
real
45 minutes for that, Pete. I know how you feel.
Well, at least, but it's on the face of it nice that they're offering a glimpse of what they could be doing. But, to be brutally honest, Toyota have really set a stall out that, they're going to do hybrid for as long as they can. They're, for whatever reason, really pushing hydrogen and are clearly only making plug-ins or full EVs as compliance cars. Like the not to touch on PHEVs 2 weeks in a row, I know you're not a fan, but the RAV4 PHEV in the US has been getting rave reviews. But you can't get them. They're just not building enough. And, it's the same. I think they did a RAV4 EV a long while ago in California as a compliance car. And I'm not going to say it got rave reviews, but many people were really happy with it. But they just didn't build them because they only built them as a compliance car. And, they're being forced to do a lot more in China because of their regulations. And no doubt if they want to keep selling cars in the EU, which is maybe where this is heading, or at least shows the direction toward, is they're going to have to do EVs. Otherwise, one, they're going to be missing out on an ever-increasing market share. And also, at least in the EU, they're going to be crippled by fines for continuing to sell what are effectively just petrol cars with a little motor on.
I mean, the specs are interesting for this particular car. They're a bit vague, which you'd expect at this point in their development cycle. There are some statistics on there that are similar to another vehicle that's quite close to home, but we won't talk about that thing. We'll park that thingy.
Let's not talk about that thingy.
No, we'll avoid that. Direct four-wheel drive system can send power to the front, rear, or both axles as required. 0 to 60 in a claimed 3 seconds. Battery size of 90 kilowatt hours, charging up to 150 kilowatts, with a WLTP certified range of 373 miles. That's very similar to something we know and won't talk about. Interesting. But range brings up another topic. I'm spotting a segue there, Pete, but you've clearly got more to say.
Well, I always like to have a rant about Toyota, but yeah, I mean, Lexus already have, I think, a product out, right? The UX something or other, and it's pretty pitiful. But yes, sorry, I missed a segue. Range, Edmunds.
Yeah, you want to talk about Edmunds?
Well, they were in some hot water with the Tesla Arti, weren't they, in the last week or so? So, Edmunds,
do you want to explain a little bit about what Edmunds is? Because not everybody will know, I shouldn't think.
So I think Edmunds is a US-based consumer publication, right, for all things cars. So I guess a similar comparison. Independent, yes, well pointed out. Similar, I guess, as a good comparison in the UK's What Car. So yes, they do journalism type things, but fundamentally they're there as like an independent consumer test kind of organization. So they do website, they've got a website, video, blog, etc. But all of it's supposed to be helpful consumer information, I guess you would say.
It's a good website, actually. It's quite informative and nicely laid out. It's clear. And
one of the things they've been doing for quite a while now is real world range tests for EVs, where they have a kind of a set route and they basically contrast that with the official figures. So in the US, that's the EPA range, which is generally a little bit...
that's a laboratory-based process, is my understanding. So it's quite a sterile, favourable environment.
Yes. And the interesting thing in the last week or so is, they tested a number of cars. So, some offerings from Tesla, I think the 3 long range, the Y, and I think the X, and then vehicles from other manufacturers. So I think there was an e-tron in there, an I-Pace, and I think a smattering of the ones. And on Edmunds tests, the only cars to not best their EPA figures were Tesla, which sounds odd, right?
I hasten to add Polestar also, but only marginally by comparison.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing there, right, is Tesla themselves always tell us that they're best for range, and here you've got an independent consumer report that have done a fairly robust test, as good as you can really do in the real world, and they're coming behind, not only coming behind the competitors, but are coming behind the figures that they're supposed to hit from the EPA. Now, the latter,
tune of between 2.5% up to looks like 17.5%. So sizable.
Now, I think the main point I want to come on to is it, in the first instance, is it that bad that they don't hit the EPA number? So, as you say, it's a laboratory test with ideal conditions. It's indoor, at a set temperature. It's not realistic, right? In the same way as if you buy a fossil car that says it does 60 miles per gallon, for an absolute fact, for an absolute fact, you're never going to get anywhere close. So in that regard, I'm not so concerned. But I think the interesting point is, I think Tesla are sailing close to the wind, because you can clearly see on the face of it that other manufacturers are sandbagging, right? You've got this ideal or idealistic indoor laboratory test, and in in the real world, with all the variabilities that come with that, most manufacturers, at least in their testing, are doing better than what their certified range is. And I think the Taken was crazily more, right? Like the Taken's supposed to do 200 and it did 320.
Let me tell you.
One moment.
Taycan EPA estimated range of 203 versus an Edmunds tested 323.
There you go. I was close enough.
That's a phenomenal difference.
So, as I say, clearly other manufacturers have been bitten before with emissions and with tests and with fuel economy figures, and they're sandbagging so that when a customer actually gets in the car in the real world, it does at least what it says on the tin. Whereas Tesla, I think, in striving to be the market leader in range, are using everything they can to get a really high EPA figure or to get a really high test figure. And I think that could be quite dangerous because, again, Edmunds being consumer facing, what actually matters is not.
All of the other manufacturers are being cautious with the EVs at the moment in terms of the figures that they quote.
Yeah, I mean, we know Porsche have always been conservative with any figure, right? Whether that's 0 to 60 time, whether it's braking distances, or now with EV range. But I think also other manufacturers are being cautious or are under-egging performance because they know one of the key things from customers is range, and that's when we talked about lowering the wall to adoption is if you give a customer a car for a weekend and say it's going to do 200 miles of range and it does 110, they're not going to come back on Monday afternoon with the car and want to buy it either. Whereas if it actually does 200 or maybe a little bit more, then at least it does what it says on the tin. So I think Tesla is sailing quite close to the wind, but the Tesla arty and Tesla engineers threw the toy out of the pram, right, and said, yeah, but that doesn't include the buffer. So for folks that aren't so aware is, when it gets down to zero, there's maybe a little bit more in the tank, to use a fossil phrase. So obviously when you go into the red and the needle hits the pin, you might have some fumes in the tank, which is there to basically just get you to the petrol station. And equally in an EV, there is a quote unquote buffer, which is just enough juice to get you in theory to a very nearby charging station.
It's usually something like anywhere between 6 and 20 miles usually, isn't it?
Yeah. And what I was amazed about is Edmunds took the car from 100% to indicated 0 miles of range, and that's what they first
read
published.
How far they went. Yep.
Which, from a consumer point of view, are you really going to get to 0? No, but it's good to know how far you can get to 0. Now, Edmunds were contacted by Tesla, and I'm sure they got some hate from the infamous Tesla arty, and they said, yeah, but you're not using the buffer. And this kind of irked me, really, as much as I said before that, well, we're both fans of Tesla and what they're doing, but you shouldn't drive past 0. You shouldn't do it in a fossil car, and you certainly shouldn't do it in an EV. And actually, when you look in any owner's manual, including Tesla's, you're explicitly
told not to.
Not only don't drive past 0, but don't really get to 0. And yet here you are, Tesla, who don't have a PR department anymore. So that's another thing we can talk about. But, you've got Tesla engineers saying, oh, this is not fair because you're not including the range that you get from the buffer. But you're never supposed to use the buffer. And what amazed me was Edmunds seemed to comply and did quite a good test, actually, with other vehicles at 65 miles an hour until, basically they coasted down and completely, died dead. So it was a good test in that regard, and I think it showed that, some cars had, I think, 7 miles or 12 miles. But a really important thing, if you don't drive much EVs, is that buffer will be based on how you've driven the car previously. So if you've been thrashing it or you've been on the motorway, then you might not have that amount left. So it's very dangerous to drive it past zero, as it is in, any form of powered car.
It's a bit of a shame that Edmunds bowed to that, really, because it kind of goes against their independence. If they're willing to make that change.
Yeah, I think they did it because the amount of heat they've got it. And actually, maybe it's useful if, I don't know, your wife's going into labour or there's an emergency or, some crazy reason to know actually how much is in that buffer. But that buffer's not guaranteed. And as you say, bowing to Tesla, basically complaining, is maybe not the best look. But equally, Edmunds did refuse to go back and add that buffer onto their real world range. So they stuck with the values from the original publication. But nonetheless, they did do this buffer range test additionally.
It's nice that they included the other manufacturers in that check, though.
Yeah. Yep. And some were quite large, I think, as well. So again, it shows that people or manufacturers are being cautious with how much battery reserve they're using at the top and the bottom of the battery.
We're almost there, Pete. Another week.
It's a whistle-stop tour of EV news.
And there's a constant stream of it. Every week there's something new to talk about. But I'd like to end on the fact that Extreme E starts again this weekend.
What's Extreme E, Pete?
Well, funny you should say that, Pete. So Extreme E is an off-road racing series that uses exclusively electric SUVs. I believe it's being shown in the UK on ITV, for those of you that still watch terrestrial TV rather than the YouTubes or the Netflixes. I'm not sure where they're starting this weekend, but they have sites from anywhere from Amazon rainforest to the Arctic. And as I say, it uses electric vehicles and it promotes gender equality. So you've got mixed racing teams, one female, one male driver, and they swap duties half the way through the race, which is quite fun. So I've not been quite so interested in motorsport for a long time, but I might be tuning into this one, see what's what. It's being sponsored by a few renewable energy companies, so I'm keen to see what's what.
Yeah, it sounds cool. I think there's a few F1 folks getting involved, right? I think Jenson Button is racing or has got a team, and I think Lewis Hamilton, I'm sure, is not driving, but he's got something to do with one.
He's also got a team, and in previous years that have very honestly not been as well publicised as this year, Ken Block, I think, has been involved, and there are, as you say, some other big names. Valtteri Bottas, I think, is driving this year, so could be interesting to watch. Yeah, Sebastian Loeb, another big name.
Oof. Sounds cool.
Should we knock it on the
head?
Have to talk about that
next week.
Yeah,
I think that's it for another week. So, as always, we'll endeavour to do another one of these next week. We're a bit early this week, but next Thursday, I think. Do next Thursday,
yes.
And we'll put this episode. We'll put this episode up, and all the episodes are in the archive, I suppose, or on YouTube channel.
And now linked on our website.
Good point.
Do visit our website. You can communicate to us through that, if not through the comments on YouTube. And what was I going to say? I was going to say
comment, subscribe.
No, they're your words. I don't say those.
Thank you.
I was going to wish everybody happy Easter for those people that around the world celebrate it, because it is a long weekend celebrating Easter.
Cool. Good point to end.
Finish. Yeah. Until next week, this has been the PlugBox Podcast. Speak to you next week.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.